I'm showing you how to create fundamental 3D scenes, right? So we have this object called CSG Box 3D, which stands for Constructive Solid Geometry Box 3D. And we also have a bunch of other CSG nodes, okay? So we have CSG cylinder, mesh, polygon, sphere, torus, all that stuff. So I'll just go ahead and create a cylinder, plop that on the screen. Pretty good, and you can change the height. You can change the diameter of it, okay? You can also change the number of sides it has, okay? You'll see that as we extend this one, it currently only has 8 sides, but if I want it nice and smooth, I could crank that up to like 64 sides. And there we go, right? So we have this like these different objects that we can sort of interact with very easily, okay? CSG in particular, they're very good for prototyping 3D environments, okay? They're not necessarily great for overall performance, but they're very easy to use when you're first getting started, okay? So I will show you how these look, right? We can run this project, and you'll see there it is. There's our sort of 3D object. Now let's say that we want to actually like change the way some of this stuff looks, okay? Maybe we're tired of things just looking like default white. Let's actually give our objects some materials, okay? And so in 2D, we work with textures. We give assets textures. In 3D, we need to give assets materials because there's more information that we need to convey in the third dimension, right? Because we're simulating light bouncing off of the object, we need to simulate more aspects of an object's surface. So for instance, we need to simulate how rough or smooth it is, right? How shiny, how absorbent or reflective it is, how if it's got any sort of bumps or fissures or textures in it, right? And so instead of just using textures in the third dimension, we use what's called materials, okay? So in order to give an object a material, I'm going to go ahead and click the Material tab and create a new standard material. And you'll see that sort of changes the color a little bit already because we're now applying a material to it. And you can sort of see the material previewed right here. And if you click on this resource, just like any other resources, it pulls up a bunch of different things which we can edit in order to change different properties of it. So for starters, if you just want to change the color of something, you're going to want to look in the albedo section. Albedo is essentially a fancy word for color. You can give things a basic color, right? So we can make like a nice blue or green ground. That's kind of fun. You can also give things a texture, okay? So I'm going to drag and drop this texture. You can either drag them onto the object directly, or you can drag them into this texture property, and that does a similar thing. And you'll sort of notice that the color, right, the color kind of shines through the object, and the albedo kind of like uses is like the base color from which the texture is then applied on top of, right? You also sort of notice that this texture is sort of like stretched out in a way that's like maybe not ideal, right? So you can also change the way the texture is mapped out onto the object, okay? In order to do that, you edit what's known as the UV, okay? So I'm going to go down here to the UV tab. There's actually 2 different UVs, and frankly, it's best with this sort of stuff to just kind of mess around and start sort of understanding how they work themselves. So I'm going to, you can change like the scale of the UV, right? And you'll notice like the bigger the number, the kind of like the more repeats that it has. So you can sort of crank up the scale. You can also change the offset to try and like scooch them a little bit. And actually I think it works better as a floating point, probably, I would imagine. Yeah, so like a floating point number kind of, this is sort of like scooching the texture around on the 3-dimensional object, right? We can scooch it this way or this way. I don't know exactly what happens when we scooch it on the Z. Yeah, nothing. You can also turn on what's called triplanar, and that basically like shrinks it down to fit kind of like a really nice sort of tiling pattern. It sort of takes the texture and stretches it out really nicely across the whole object. You can also turn on world triplanar, which is slightly different. Again, it's really best to just sort of play around with all these things and to get an effect that you like. Okay, Um, so materials have they have a texture property. Okay, they also have what's known as like a so I'll just sort of reset this to white. They also have a roughness property, which can take a roughness texture. There's like all of these different sort of things that you can start playing around with, right? And if you want to sort of get a really nice 3D sort of material setup, we kind of have to use all of these bits and pieces combined together in a way, okay? So I'll sort of show you what that looks like. I'm going to go and search the internet for a good texture, a good sort of material that we can use that has all of these different information channels, right? Because we've already set like a color and an albedo texture channel, but we haven't set any sort of metallic information. We haven't set any sort of roughness information. We haven't set a normal map. A normal map is really essential because that sort of demonstrates that is what conveys shadow and sort of how light bounces off of the object. Okay, so in order to make something look like a really nice three-dimensional material, we need to do more than just apply a simple texture to it, right? If I ran this right now, you can see it looks kind of nice, but it looks sort of very flat. The ground doesn't really have any depth to it. So I'm going to go ahead and find a material. Okay, so I'm going to go on the internet, and I'm going to browse for, I believe, like good PBR materials. PBR is like a nice shortcut for materials. You can also just search for like good textures and materials. And if you sort of add game engine and stuff, right? There's all of these wonderful like websites and things online. I'm gonna go to let's just see what we have here for download. So these are all these materials that we can download, right? And you'll see they're applied to these spheres to sort of give you a sense of like what they kind of look like and feel like. I'm gonna try this sand. Let's see if we can get this sand. And I'm going to go to get the zip files for the PNGs. And you can get either 1K, 2K, 4K, or 8K. You know, the bigger file, the ostensibly the fancier, but for our purposes, I'm just going to maybe grab the 4K one. I'll grab the 2K one. And then you can just click download. And it'll download this material. Again, this is from Ambient CG, but there's like a bunch of different websites all kind of like this. And then when you open up this material, you'll see that it has basically just a bunch of different PNGs. It has the ambient occlusion PNG, the albedo PNG, the normal map PNG, and the roughness texture PNG, right? These are all different textures that we're gonna apply to our material in order to create the effect that we want. So I'm gonna extract all of these, and I'm gonna extract these to the folder that we have created, Hello 3D. I'll create a new folder called materials. And I'll just create that and I'll extract these to that folder. And you'll see, right, we just have these regular old PNGs which have been imported to this Gato project folder, right? And you'll also see that they're just pictures, right? This is just like a flat picture of the color. This is the albedo texture. And you'll also see that we have these other pictures that are for some of these other properties. Okay, so this is a displacement texture, which is sort of like the roughness or the height. We have the normal map texture, which is going to show the computer how to bounce light off of this and all that. And we have a bunch of different textures that we can use to sort of give our material extra information so that it looks better in 3D, right? So if I go back to Gato, we're going to import the assets. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just wipe away this texture, and I'm going to drag in the color to the color, right, the albedo texture. I'll just drag this in here and drop it. And you'll see that this is already getting applied kind of well. Let's see, it's kind of hard to see. There we go. When we're not selected it, you can see it a little bit better. It's like getting sort of stretched out on the ground in a way that looks decent, okay? It looks okay, right? But it doesn't look great. So I'm gonna go back to this box and I'm gonna keep fiddling with things until it gets even better, right? I'm going to go back to the, let's see, I'll turn off triplanar. No, I'll turn that back on. That clearly looked even better. So I'm going to go to UV triplanar, turn that on. Hello, triplanar. Thank you. Now I'm going to go to the, let's see, we have a couple different options. I'm going to take the roughness texture, and I'm going to go and drag this over here to the roughness property. Just drag and drop that there. Okay. Then I'm going to go to the normal map, and I'm going to enable the normal map. And then I'm going to drag and drop the normal map texture just onto this texture for the normal map property. And you'll see now it looks a lot better, right? We can kind of see that the light for the scene is actually kind of bouncing off this texture in a nice way, right? Because we've included that information. We've told the light how it's supposed to bounce off of this sand texture. And then the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see if I can get this displacement texture. Displacement, again, is sort of like an extra height dimension that we're going to add to this object's material. So I'm going to go to height. In Godot, it's called height, so I'm going to enable the height texture. And then I'm going to drag and drop this displacement texture onto it to create a bit of a height map. And you can either, let's see, is this doing anything for us? Doesn't really look like it's doing too much. Let's see. Get nice and close to it. I'll click the box. I can toggle a couple settings. Again, with these sorts of settings, it's kind of good to just sort of mess around and see what floats your boat, what works. Flip texture, no. Enabled. In any case, right, there's lots of settings that you can keep fiddling with. I'll come back and see if I can get a functioning demo working for this material. But if we run the scene now, well, you'll see that the camera's really far away, but let's take the camera and move it maybe closer to the scene. Maybe like down towards the ground a little bit. And we'll make it look up. And we'll run this. And that looks okay, right? That doesn't look too bad. Could look better, but it also could look worse. And this is really sort of the process of creating 3D materials, right? In order to create an object in 3D, it needs to have a shape, it needs to have a mesh, and then the mesh needs to also have a material, right? The material itself is like the texture, the lighting information, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to pause this particular tutorial here, I think. Let's see. Let's go back to what we want to do for the lab 1 and just make sure we've hit our bases. So we have materials. Yeah, I think it would be fun to cover models briefly. And I'll also show you how to create like a very simple 3D character, right? Because we've had a 2D character body. Why don't we go ahead and also create a 3D character that can navigate 3D space? So in order to create a 3D character, you need to add, you can either use a CSG shape, but I'm going to use something a little bit more performant, something that'll work a little bit better in the long run. I'm going to use what's called a mesh. So I'm going to search for a mesh instance 3D. And the mesh, almost, you know, just like our sprite, needs to have a resource itself, right? On its own, we don't see anything. So I'm going to create a new mesh called a capsule mesh. And I'm going to drag it up. And this is just like a little bean. We often use beans to be players and stand-ins for players in 3D because they're roughly sort of person-sized. And much like a sprite doesn't have a collision shape, okay, mesh instances also don't have collision shapes. So what you can do is create a collision shape by going to collision shape 3D, and I will create a capsule collision shape. And the capsule collision shape is the same shape as the mesh instance, right? That's pretty good. So that should line up pretty nicely, right? And the collision shape is also complaining because just like our regular 2D collision shapes, right? We don't actually want our collision shapes to be children of sprites. We want them to be children of bodies, of static bodies, animatable bodies, or character bodies. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new character body 3D. I'm going to take this collision shape and make it a child of the character body instead. And then I'm going to take the mesh and take it and make it a child of the character body. Okay, this was kind of a roundabout way to do things. I should have done it in a different order. But basically, when we're creating character bodies in 3D, we want to have a character body, a collision shape, and a mesh, right? And I'm just going to really make sure that everything is nicely centered. I'm going to reset the transform of the character body. I'm also going to reset the transform of all of these guys so that we're now at a nice 0, 0, 0, right? We're all kind of evenly lined up. Now in order to create a character body that moves around, again, I'm just going to right click and attach a script. And just how character body 2D has a template that works really nicely for the 2D character body, character body 3D also has a nice template. So I'm just going to hit create. Hello, where did that nice template go? Let's try that again. I'm going to detach the script. I'm going to delete the script. And we're going to try one more time to attach a script. Character body 3D. Template. I'm going to click the template and turn it on. Great, there we go. Here's our wonderful little character body 3D template, which is very similar to our character body 2D template. So I'm going to save that. And then now back in our 3D scene, let's see, let's take our camera and let's maybe move it closer towards the player. Okay, I'm going to take the player and I'll move it up in the sky just so we can see it fall. And yeah, that looks like that'll be good. Let's run the scene. There's the character and it falls right through the ground. Why does it fall through the ground? Because CSG shapes by default don't have collisions turned on. What's nice about CSG shapes is they do have built-in collision shapes, and in order to turn them on, all you need to do is go to their CSG shape 3D property and turn on use collision. Okay, so these CSG shapes are really handy because you don't have to create extra collision shapes. That's one of the benefits of using them. You can just go and click use collision, and now we'll see that this CSG box has a collision shape and the CSG cylinder has a collision shape. And now when we run the scene, our character will fall, hit the ground, and because it's a character body, we are able to move it with the arrow keys, which is pretty cool. Now, it's a little disorienting, right? Our camera is at a very different angle and perspective from our character, so when I'm pressing up, I'm going like to the left, and when I'm pressing down, I'm going to the right. So in order to sort of orient ourselves in 3D, it's a really good practice to think about what perspective you want to have your gameplay from, but very common 3D perspectives are either first person or third person. And in either case, it's a good practice to try and make your camera like sort of follow the player around, right? So I'm going to attach the camera to the player. I'm going to just reset its transformation so that it is right at the base of the player. Then I'm going to move it backwards a little bit, and you'll see here in the camera preview, right? I'm going to move it up, further back, and then I'll just tilt it like, just tilt it down a little bit, and then I'll move it a little bit higher. This is kind of a nice sort of easy character perspective. And now, here I am moving around in 3D, right? I can even jump, can do all this sort of fun stuff right here in 3D. It's pretty sweet. And you'll see that I'm colliding with this object, right? So these are pretty fun, easy ways to start interacting with simple 3D stuff, right? You could very easily make a whole level of just kind of like, I don't know, like a temple or a city. You know, you can sort of very roughly mock things up by sort of using CSG nodes, right? I'm going to go ahead and like take let's make a pyramid since we're in the desert, I guess. I'll do CSG cylinder, and the cylinder has a cute trick. You can take it, drag it up, and you can just press the cone button and it turns the cylinder into a cone. I'll give it like 32 sides. I'll make the radius much bigger and the height much bigger. And I'll drag it down so it's intersecting with the ground. And then again, I'll just give it a material, and then I'm not going to go through the trouble of sort of giving it textures or anything right now. I'll just give it a color, like an albedo, maybe like a orangey type color. That's kind of a pyramid-esque thing. And again, in order to give it a collision shape, right, you just go and scroll down and click Use Collisions. Now if I run this, here we are in the desert with a pyramid, right? So this is a very easy way to start prototyping environments. But let's say that you actually want to bring in some fancier environments, right? Maybe you actually want to like replace these temporary assets with more interesting 3D models. Well, there are 3D models all over the internet, and they're very straightforward to import into Godot. I'm going to show you how to get some from the asset library first, and then I'll show you how to bring in some from the web itself. So to find some in the asset library, you can just poke around and look for packets that seem fun. I know that there's an artist called K who makes these nice little kits called K kits. And I'm going to, let's bring in the space. Sounds fun. I'm going to bring in these space bits. And this pack is just a pack of 3D models, okay? And in order to use it, you just download it. Because these are just models and not actually like a plugin, I don't think I actually need to enable any sort of plugin, but you'll see that this comes with all these different objects and materials, right? So I'm just going to hit install. And now we're importing these assets. And then you can hit OK. And then back in our 3D scene, right here in our add-ons folder, we have these KKit space bits. And we see that we have a couple different object model types. We have OBJ file types and GLTF file types. I recommend using GLTF if possible, because they have materials and stuff embedded in them. So for instance, if I just use this this OBJ, if I were to just drag and drop this, it'll have the color and stuff. Well, actually, maybe these are packaged in a nice way. So I guess these OBJs are probably fine to use. But oftentimes when you use OBJs, you sort of have to manually bring in their texture data and stuff. But you can really just drag and drop them, as you have just seen. I literally just took those files and dragged them into the scene. And we have a reference to it to a GLTF scene. Now, if you want to actually edit these scenes, it's going to ask you to create a new inherited scene, because it's imported automatically. You can't just edit these files, right? So you kind of need to use them as nodes in existing scenes. That's all a little bit confusing, but basically, like, if I want to like change this actual geometry data, you can go ahead and do new inherited scene, and then you can like edit this existing stuff. And what you'll see is that with these, with these basic meshes, right, you'll see that we have this mesh instance 3D, which is very similar to what we used for our player, right? We're just using a different mesh. So for our player, we're just using a capsule mesh, and for this base module, we're using a like a file as our mesh. But these also, like sprites, don't have any collision data, right? So if I were to interact with them by just sort of going, let's see if I can find them. I don't have any camera controller, so it's a little bit hard to find where I put them. There they are. If I were to just run over to these, I would run right through them, right? These are just sprites, basically. These are just images on screen. They don't have any collision data. So the easiest way to create a collision shape for a 3D object is to go and find the mesh itself. So I guess if you're using the OBJs, that's sort of a benefit because you can just drag the OBJs in, and these are just basic meshes. So then you can click mesh, and then you can just say create collision shape, and then you can say, you can either make it as a sibling or you can make it as a static body child. This is pretty nice if you just want to make this object like a standalone object that is not going to move around at all, right? So I'll just hit static body child, try mesh, and then create. And then you'll see that this creates a static body 3D with a collision shape that is based off of the mesh itself. So again, in order to just create like a collision shape for your 3D models, all you have to do is hit mesh, create collision shape, and then you can either pick a sibling collision shape, which is good if you want it to be like, if we're trying to make a character body, right? Like if you want to create like a different object for this collision shape, or if you just want it to be like a frozen in space thing, you can just quickly create a mesh, collision shape, static body child, create. Again, because this one here is like a scene that is referencing another file, you can either create a new inherited scene and give the collision shapes over here, or I think you could just right click and do make local, and that's going to take this mesh and make it local, a local node, and then you can sort of access it directly. It's pretty exciting stuff, and also pretty dense. I realize that we're getting way into the weeds here of how to interact with 3D meshes and stuff. But hopefully by virtue of the fact that these are tutorials and videos, you should be able to rewatch them at your leisure. But yeah, this is how you can basically like import and interact with 3D models, right? So I showed you how to get them from the asset library. Also just show you a couple cute little places on the internet. I mean, as always, Itch has wonderful 3D assets. Itch has more 2D assets, but you can also find like Turbo Squid, and actually also, so Turbo Squid has a bunch of free 3D models, right? I'm gonna go to here. You might need an account to use Turbo Squid, but you can download any of these models and those would work. We have assets on Itch, game assets, 3D. And then here's all these game assets. Oh look, Kay has all of her stuff up there. That's fun. But that's a cool looking robot. Maybe I'll grab a robot. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to this voxel robot pack. I will go and hit download now. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be in the file format that I want. So I'm actually just going to go find somebody easier. Let's get these. Let's see. All of these would work. I'm just being kind of picky, I guess. Yeah, let's get this gas station. Seems kind of fun. Download now. No thanks. Download. This is a compressed file, which I'm going to open up and extract. We've got models and texture data, so that's pretty good. Another very common file type for 3D is FBX. I believe if you're working in Cinema 4D, it'll export to FBX. And that works just as well, I believe. So I'm extracting these files. We have a gas station folder now in our project. We're re-importing the gas station. And now, bing, bang, boom, Bob's your uncle. You can just take your gas station and drag it and drop it. Wow, and that's a whole gas station scene. Comes with this model comes with a lot. So like, let's say you don't want to have all of this stuff. Probably what you want to do is like right click on it and make it local. And then you'll see we have all the different independent meshes, which you can either keep or not keep, right? So I'm just gonna like, geez, this is a lot of stuff. I guess that makes, there's cookies? Where are the cookies? Let's go find the cookies. Sorry, so easily distracted. But I am very curious about where these cookies are. Wow, so this gas station has a whole bunch of stuff inside too. That's pretty cool. You're really just getting a peek into my rich inner life of having ADHD and being a game developer. In any case, right, this is how you can bring in models fairly easily to your scenes. This would all work pretty much as is. You might want to add collision shapes to some of this stuff. So what I will do is, oh geez, I guess what I'll do is highlight all of them. We'll give collision shapes to everybody. Let's see if it breaks Gato. I'm gonna highlight all these things. Boop. Mesh, create collision shape, try mesh static body. No, that actually worked really quickly. So now when I run the scene, here we're here in this gas station. I guess I had it a little too high up in the sky. So I would probably need to drag it down a little bit. We'll just take my player and bring them to the gas station. Yeah, well, look at that. It's like a whole spooky little gas station. So you can really go nuts here with this stuff. You can find a lot of really great tutorials on the internet on how to make your own models. I recommend using something like Blender to create your own models and then import them into your game engine. I'll also show you briefly, since we're here in this gas station, I'll briefly show you some techniques for creating a little bit more of an ambiance, since this is a tutorial sort of covering a bunch of different things. I'll show you how to do some, to create a little bit of atmosphere. So here in the scene that we have, I have this world environment node that we created. And the world environment node can really do a lot. So for starters, you can turn on fog. Fog is a great way to just add a classic old school spooky vibe to your scene, right? Just by turning on fog, we can obscure the rendering distance to make it harder to see things. So we have this kind of classic type of fog. If you're using the Forward Plus renderer, we also have volumetric fog, which looks really nice. It's kind of basically a better looking fog. And you can mess around and change all these different types of properties for things like the emission color of the fog, how much energy it has. Again, with all this sort of 3D environment stuff, I really recommend just kind of playing around with the different numbers and curves and things until you start finding things that you like. Oftentimes it feels like, you're not actually doing anything with the sliders, but they're all kind of pretty situational and specific. So just by turning on volumetric fog, that gets pretty cool. What else do we have? We've talked briefly about the node called Directional Light 3D, right? Directional Light 3D is basically like sunlight, but there are also a bunch of other lighting nodes in Gato. Okay, so instead of just using a Directional Light 3D, you can use other lighting nodes that create more specific types of environments. So for instance, here in this gas station, maybe we want to make a night scene, right? So for starters, the night scene probably is not going to have sunlight. Maybe it'll have moonlight. So what we can do is we can go to the light and we can just sort of turn down the energy a lot, maybe to like 0.1. And I'll make it more of a blue light. And we'll just sort of run that. Now we have a spooky little night scene. It's kind of fun. But maybe we want to have even better lighting, right? All of these sort of, and these materials I think are probably, I don't know, they're not necessarily doing us any favors. I think maybe they're emitting color or something. Also, for reference, right, this model is supposed to be an old school kind of retro gas station, but you can get very fancy looking models too. But let's go ahead and add in addition to a directional light, maybe even instead of a directional light, I'm going to add a node called a, let's see, we have a directional light, we have a spotlight, and we have an omni light. The spotlight is very good for creating sort of light sources that are specifically oriented in a place and direction, right? So unlike the sun, the spotlight light source actually does have a distance, and its position in the scene matters a lot. So for instance, I'm just gonna hide this whole, there's a lot happening here. I'm gonna bring the light source up to here, and then I will drag it here. And let's see what it looks like if I sort of scroll down. Oh, it's kind of hidden, so I'm going to bring it up. So here's our light source, and you can kind of see that it is, let's see, Spotlight 3D, spot. It has a range, and it has an attenuation, which is sort of like a, whoa. I guess the attenuation is kind of like, what is attenuation? It is the distance. Hello, come back. The distance attenuation, great. Well, you can sort of read more about it here. But then you can also change the angle, like the sort of width, right? So this slider affects the distance, and this one affects the width. Then you can kind of rotate it down to face the ground. I'm gonna maybe like bring it over from this spotlight, and I'll drag it down so it hits the ground. There we go, now we're actually like hitting the ground. And then you can change the light property. So I'll change the light to maybe more like a sickly light green or something from a spooky fluorescent light. And you can sort of really mess with any of these properties, right? And so now when I run the scene, here we are, whee! Now we're kind of approaching this kind of creepy little gas station. And this doesn't look amazing, you know, this, what we really want is for this to actually feel illuminated. In order to do that, you want to sort of mess with the emissive properties of the material of the light source, or you can put a light sort of directly behind it and play with the transparency of the object, but all of that is getting way ahead of ourselves. For this particular assignment, all I encourage you to do, right, for the lab 2 is just make a scene with a shape, a character body 3D, and a camera that can move around. Obviously, if you want to add models and stuff, that's very exciting, but it's not required for this particular assignment. And I think I'm going to pause it there, right? This is already a whole bunch of information conveyed to you in a pretty scattershot, roundabout way. So really just mess around with all of these different objects and settings and nodes, and start thinking about if you're interested in exploring making a 3D project for your capstone project, okay? As always, you can reach out to me with questions. I might post some supplemental material in the coming days as well, so keep an eye on your inboxes. But other than that, stay happy, stay healthy, stay sane, and I will see you in class soon. Thanks, folks.